Okay, so like you may have seen on the schedule today, we're looking at typical comparisons. Now, some of this you're bound to know, some of it should be new, but I think that there's the resource of the Band 9 essay bank in the bonuses section of the writing course that people aren't really making enough benefit of. So I think like if this type of thing is difficult for you or if this thing is new for you, like I said before, you're really, really lucky with academic task 1 because you can learn all the language in advance, well, all the language specific to graphs in advance. Obviously the language that comes up in connection to the categories and such things are related to your general vocabulary level. But in relation to the vocabulary that you need for describing graphs, that can all be learned in advance. So that's something that you should make a priority because it's something that 9 times out of 10 you'll be able to use in your IELTS writing. But sorry, back to the Band 9 essay bank. Thing is, there are lots of sample essays there, and all kind of like the cohesive devices, the way the language is used to compare categories, to contrast categories, all that type of thing is very typical of what you will have to do in your test. So my suggestion is that you would go through all the Band 9 essay bank task 1 academic essays and just see, do you know the way the language is used, first of all? So do you understand how it's being used? And secondly is, can you use it in the same way? So we will look at some of the way to make comparisons in the lesson today, but this is not a complete set of all the different ways you can compare. So definitely go through those essays, take a look at how the language is used, first of all, and secondly, do you know how to use the language in that way? The other thing before we start, I just wanted to say that all the examples I've used are just off the top of my head to show you the structures. They're not actually related to a real question. So just in case some of you are wondering why I didn't show you the question, it's because there isn't one, basically. So it's just off the top of my head. Okay. So the first one is very basic, comparing two adjectives with a comparative. So that's the adjective plus ER, like higher, bigger, smaller, and whatnot. So English people spending on sports equipment was higher than the Welsh throughout the entire period. So just comparing two categories. So very straightforward. With any of this stuff, with any of these different examples I'm showing you, you should be pausing the video and taking notes if it's something that you cannot do competently already. If you are able to do comparatives, I mean, this one you're probably able to do very easily, but as we go through the lesson, you should be making lots of notes on anything that's new, either that you don't know, you've never seen it before, or that you personally cannot use that structure to compare categories. The next one then is superlatives, and what's really good about superlatives is that you can use it to imply all the categories. So like, for example, here, English people spending on sports equipment was highest throughout the entire period. So I don't know how many categories this is representing, but it does include all of them. So if this table had 5 categories or 6 categories, we still know something about the other ones. So we know English was the highest one, so we know something about the other ones as well, as that they were less than England, they weren't the highest. So by using superlatives, it allows us, especially in an overview, to cover all the categories without mentioning them. So that's a very useful tool. Okay, so this one then is, if there are, you want to communicate the 2 highest pieces of data for the same category. So this means we only have one category, but we want to describe 2 things about that category that are the highest, or that are the lowest, 2 things about that category that are the greatest, the smallest, the biggest, whatever it be. But basically that they have 2 similar pieces of data about one category. The example I use here, not only did English people spend the most on sports equipment in the given year, they also spent the highest number of hours participating in sport. So this, we're imagining that there are several countries and several categories in relation to sport, and English is the highest in 2 of these. English people are the highest in 2 of these. The next one then is even though and it, or whatever pronoun you will need. So this is if you're talking about one category. So in this example, we have English people, but one of the pieces of data is the highest amongst all the categories, and one of the pieces of data is the lowest among all the categories. So showing a contrast between the highest and the lowest for one given category. So even though English people spent the most on sports equipment in the given year, they were the nation that spent the fewest number of hours participating in sport. This could also be, for example, used if it was like a line graph where English people spent the most on sports equipment at the start, but the least at the end of the period. So that would be like, even though English people spent the most on sports equipment at the start of the given period, they spent the least by the end of that period. So it could be like it was the highest at the start, the lowest at the end, or it could be the highest for one piece of data and the lowest for the other piece of data. This is actually the same structure. So same as even though, you use although instead, and it's the same thing, one highest and one lowest for the same category. Although English people spent the most on sports equipment in the given year, they were the nation that spent the fewest number of hours participating in sport. So that's pretty much the exact same, except we're using although instead of even though. Okay, so here we're looking at however to be used to show a contrast or a difference. So a contrast is basically, it's like a difference between 2 categories. So here, English people were spending the most on sports equipment at the start of the period. However, the Welsh became the predominant spenders on this category by the end of the period. So basically, English were the highest at the start, Welsh were the highest at the end. So however, it just shows that there's a contrast between the information that I've already given you. So this is to give contrasting information about things that happened at the same time. I've given you 2 examples because the grammar will change based on where you put the word while, but the meaning is the same. So while English people were spending the most on sports equipment in the given year, it was the Welsh who spent the highest number of hours participating in sport. Okay, so we're contrasting who was the highest in each piece of data. While goes with here, while English people were spending, while has the past continuous being used with it, and the other clause is just using past simple. So the other example then, English people spent the most on sports equipment in the given year, while the Welsh were spending the highest number of hours participating in sport. Okay, so there we have the contrast again, but while being used with the past continuous. Okay, so that is some of the different ways that you can compare. Like I said, have a look through the Band 9 essay bank and see what other ways can this be done. But what I want you to do is I just want you to comment on 4 of these categories and write your sentences in the comments under the video. Okay, thank you guys. I'll be back tomorrow with your global feedback.